Hello, and welcome to another Behind the Poem story based on the poems in my recently released collection, Coffee and Paper Cuts. I like telling the stories behind my poems because one of the main goals of my poetry is to try and connect with people who might feel the same way I do or might have experienced the same thing that I have, and so that everybody feels less alone. And the poem I want to talk to you about today is called Uncomfortable Conversations. So it's kind of double standard for that one, double meaning for that one, because uncomfortable conversations is about what happens when we don't share and when we don't have those conversations with each other because they are too uncomfortable, because they are difficult to have, and we kind of isolate ourselves because of it. We isolate those we care about, we isolate ourselves, and we don't really say what we need to say because it's just too hard to find the words. That's one of the reasons why I write. It's one of the main reasons why I write, is because I happen to be good, or at least okay, with words and expressing and capturing emotions and experiences. And I feel like if I can capture an emotion or an experience or an event and I can put it down on paper, it allows me in a very therapeutic kind of way to kind of deal with it outside of myself. So in Coffee and Paper Cuts, a lot of the work is from the last 2 years, which was very, very difficult for a lot of people. And during that time, during the last 2 years, there were a lot of things that became really obvious to me, things that I saw happening around me that I wanted to say something about. And sometimes I did. Sometimes I chose to have the uncomfortable conversation. But one of the difficulties with uncomfortable conversations is that you're at a loss for words. Like, you don't know what to say, and what you can think to say is trite or useless, or it isn't enough, but it's the only thing you got. So the poem kind of starts out on that basis, that uncomfortable conversations are difficult and we often don't know what to say, or we know that whatever we do say will be inadequate. I have a strong feeling that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't say it anyway. Just because you know it's trite and they know it's trite and you know it's not enough and they know it's not enough doesn't mean it shouldn't be said. We need to stop kind of isolating ourselves, stop having and avoiding those conversations. One of the second verse in the poem talks about kind of bad relationships and what people do to each other. That comes from a time before the last 2 years, a memory that I have of being around someone in a relationship, or after a relationship ended, where you still have to deal with that person, and how people can possibly love someone one moment and then treat them so unbearable the next. And I understand there's a lot of pain involving in breakups, but being that friend that's in the middle, that's in the demilitarized zone, watching your very, very good friend be treated horrible by their ex, and them having to tolerate it because they don't have any other choice, because they have to deal with that person until the person is fully out of their life, is really hard. It's really hard to bite your tongue because you're watching somebody that you like or that you admire, somebody who's a good friend, be taken advantage of or torn down by somebody who is using everything they know about them to hurt them. And it's not necessary. The relationship's over. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to do any good. But as a friend watching it, during the breakup or after the breakup, you can't say anything. It's not going to help. You want to defend your friend, but the uncomfortable part of that conversation is that you're not part of that relationship. And so you can't say anything, but you want to. And it's so difficult. And it's one of those things where, like, all you can do is be there for your friend and try to help anytime you can. In the same vein, the third verse moves past romantic relationships and breakups and how that the people treat each other after that, to kind of friendships, where somebody that is always blaming themselves for other people's bad behavior, for other people's mistakes and other people's bad manners. I have very, very good friends that are fantastic people, but are constantly getting walked over by people who take advantage of their good nature. Kind, good-hearted people who just want to do the best and be the counselor for their friend or the help for their friend, help them move, give them everything they've got, but still somehow people make them feel like it's not enough. And so that whole kind of idea of letting somebody walk over you, there's a couple of poems in here in my collection, Coffee and Paper Cuts, which deal with this kind of theme, because everybody was so stressed over lockdown and everybody was so stressed over this time period of isolation that they kind of forgot how to treat each other, even in close friendships. And so there's one or two poems about this, if coming from different angles, that are included within the kind of umbrella of uncomfortable conversations. There was another experience that I put into here of a different kind of uncomfortable conversation where you go with a friend or a boyfriend or a relative, you even yourself go home, and you know that the presence of an outsider is the only thing keeping the peace, that there is a war going on when the holidays aren't here. Like everybody behaves themselves for the holidays, or everybody behaves themselves for a big family event or a big, group event, where everybody kind of puts aside their animosity to enjoy the holidays and keep the peace and be civilized to not ruin the event. But at the same time, everybody knows that it's only because there's a guest or an outsider or someone who, you don't want to air your dirty laundry in front of. So that uncomfortable conversation where that you're the one keeping the peace, and that role becomes really important so that everybody can, get the best out of their holidays or their event. But it's that part of that uncomfortable conversation where everybody knows it's happening, but nobody wants to acknowledge it because acknowledging it would take it away. That whole kind of tension of the unsaid in front of company. The next verse talks mostly about my primary job being a teacher. And there are multiple kind of layers to this particular verse, because nobody wants to hear that their child isn't doing well. And whatever the reason for their lack of success, nobody wants to hear about it or think about it, and everybody wants to find somebody to blame for it. Some of that sometimes it comes from poor manners or behavior or attitude to learning of the child. There is only so much that a teacher can do. There is only so many efforts and detentions and homeworks and complications that we have within our power to help the child progress in the work that they've been assigned to do to try and get them to pass. So, we cannot make them do the work. And if they don't do the work, they're not going to pass, no matter what we do as teachers. But a lot of times, because of poor educational experiences of the parents will assume that it's our fault, that we are not supporting them, or not giving them enough help, or not paying enough attention, or missing the bullying that's happening behind them, or, some other reason that the parent might have had a bad experience with the teacher or a bad experience with the school system, and therefore blames the teacher for the student not cooperating. And then there's another layer entirely where the parent has unrealistic expectations. I've seen students who are doing amazing, and they're good work and they're good attitude, and they work really hard, but it's not good enough for the parent. And so the unrealistic high expectation of someone who the child is doing their best, and they're not doing badly. They're not doing amazing, but they're not doing badly. But it's not good enough for the parent, because the parent has some kind of concept that, high academic, like doctors and lawyers and professional jobs that require high A's and B's and nothing lower, all of that kind of stuff, they have unreasonable expectations of their child, and that pressure is too much to put on a teenager. And it causes them to act out or misbehave or not do well, not because they can't, but because they can't live up to the expectations. So why try? So all these different reasons, it's probably the verse of the uncomfortable conversations that I have the most direct experience with. Some of the other verses are more kind of like one-off experiences that I've had. But I see this whole kind of concept of unequal judgment of education, the job snobbery of education, that drives me crazy. And a lawyer's job and a mechanic's job, and even the bin men and the shelf stackers, we all learned in the last 2 years who were the most important jobs. And it was not the financial officers, although they do have important jobs. The people that all kept us alive were the shelf stackers and the people delivering the food, and the HGV drivers that brought the food from over the country while we were all trapped. So this job snobbery, this unequal education, this concept of expecting more from your child or expecting more from your teachers than either of them is capable of, is probably the most uncomfortable conversation I have on a regular basis. The next one along was another kind of more personal verse of uncomfortable conversations, where you deal with grief or bereavement. And it's probably the uncomfortable conversation that we all kind of regularly force ourselves to do anyway, that goes back to that first verse, where you're lost for words and whatever you're going to say isn't going to be right or isn't going to be enough, but you do it anyway because you haven't got anything else. We need to kind of make sure that we are comfortable with being uncomfortable, that we have these conversations. The more we have these conversations, the more normalized that they will be, and the less uncomfortable they will be, and the closer we will be. The closer we will have support and friends and people that we know that we can reach out to, that we know we can count on. Because the person you turn to when you are uncomfortable, the person that you turn to for help or for just a sympathetic ear, is the person you can have that uncomfortable conversation with. And whether you end up agreeing or disagreeing or giving platitudes or giving sympathy that is nowhere adequate, that everybody knows isn't, you still reach out to that person that will have the conversation with you, that will listen or give advice or be there. So Uncomfortable Conversations is a poem that I feel very strongly about, obviously. And we need to also remember, not only does it not isolate us, but we're stronger than we think we are. When we open our mouths and say what we've got to say and support, we often find that whether the words that come out are right or not, just the effort of saying it, knowing that it's uncomfortable, is enough. And so that's one of the sources of these poems. And I hope you understand or sympathize or empathize or, go and have an uncomfortable conversation with someone you've been meaning to have an uncomfortable conversation with for a long time. Do it. Just bite the bullet. Oh, pick up the phone. You can even preface it with, I have absolutely no idea what to say, but I feel like I had to say something. You'll feel a lot better. They might feel a lot better. And even if you don't, hey, you tried. So thank you for listening to another Behind the Poem story. I hope and I look forward to talking to you more about the other poems in Coffee and Paper Cuts. It is available in paperback on Kindle, and for the first time, I've done an audiobook for it. So please feel free to look at my link tree and look at all of my socials and enjoy some of the material that I'm putting out there. I see you next week for another story behind the poem. Thank you.